Throughout this semester, we have seen the evolution of the Jewish identity within American society. I will demonstrate this evolution by using the film text of Hollywoodism, Jews movies and the American Dream, The Chosen, and Keeping the Faith as examples. The film Hollywoodism, Jews movies and the American Dream demonstrates the idea that the Jewish religion defined individuals as outsiders within American society, and this placed a large emphasis on Jews to feel that they needed to conform to the dominant American culture. The article that we read in class, titled The Introduction of Empire of Their Own, discusses this idea that Jews felt compelled to assimilate into a new identity to fit into American society, and in this article, the author specifically talks about the Hollywood Jews. So in this article, the author discusses how, quote, above all things, they wanted to be regarded as Americans, not Jews. They wanted to reinvent themselves here as new men. So these Hollywood moguls were compelled to get rid of their Jewish identity and hide this side of themselves in order to pursue a new kind of identity that they thought would help them fit in as insiders to Gentile America. And even though these moguls were incredibly famous and successful in their careers, they still felt like they didn't belong within the insider elite establishment as a result of their Jewishness. So as a result of their desire for acceptance, the moguls spent their lives trying to transform themselves from outsiders to insiders by erasing their Jewish heritage. And so the author discusses how what united the moguls, quote, in deep spiritual kinship was their utter and absolute rejection of their past and their equally absolute devotion to their new country. So the author talks about how these Hollywood moguls had this kind of pathological embrace of America, and they felt like America was, quote, the baptism to cleanse and renew. And going off of this, the author also explains how the Hollywood Jews set about redesigning themselves, and that with this, their own lives became a kind of art. And so these Hollywood Jews who were alienated and patronized by American society coped by attempting to live a fiction and to kind of promote this fiction amongst the minds of others. So in order to live this fiction, the Hollywood moguls went to great lengths to erase their Jewish heritage and anything Jewish about them. Some examples of this was that they hosted Christmas parties and sent their children to Catholic schools and even changed their names.
They held Easter egg hunts and Christmas parties. Some of them sent their children to Catholic schools. Their efforts to reinvent themselves seemed boundless. They even hid their Jewishness from their children and grandchildren.
I realized that my father had never told me anecdotes about the old country, that I didn't even know what his real name was. I didn't know the little village that he came from. I knew nothing about his life. And I realized that the name Warner was probably not correct, but I thought being Polish it might have been Werner. To this day, I really don't know what our original name was.
In addition to this, the moguls also partnered with the U.S. government during World War II, and they took a large role in creating pro-war films during the war effort in order to demonstrate their American and patriotic sentiments.
I mean, here were a group of Jews who had spent their lives seeking legitimacy and seeking to be embraced by America. And World War II finally affords them that opportunity to be embraced officially. They are now real patriots.
While 6 million Jews died in Europe, their kinsmen in Hollywood were churning out patriotic movies that helped galvanize the Allies to defeat Hitler.
So overall, the film Hollywoodism demonstrates the idea that Jews were inclined to distance themselves from their distinct Jewish heritage in order to Americanize themselves. And this assimilation made the Jews feel that they did have a place within American society wherein they would not be marginalized. And so this film shows how Jews kind of felt pressured to assimilate into American society in order to be respected and well-liked by Gentile America. And as a result of this kind of expectation for these Jewish immigrants to assimilate and conform to the majority of society, Jews were not on an equal playing field with the Gentiles, and thus they were not privileged with having the full ability to celebrate their distinct identity within society. Similar to Hollywoodism, the film The Chosen demonstrates the idea that Jews believe that they should assimilate and Americanize themselves in order to be respected by the majority within society. So, the Melting Pot and Beyond article by David Bial discusses this concept of Jewish assimilation into American society. And Bial discusses how, quote, Jews came to America with this consciousness of difference firmly ingrained. And this quote really shows how the Jews had this perception of themselves as a marginalized community, in that for them, the idea of coming to America was a way in which they could escape this marginalized position. And with this mentality, Jews kind of viewed America as this land where they could escape their historic destiny and become part of the majority that was outside of this marginalized position. And so the film The Chosen details the friendship of Danny Saunders, a Hasidim Jew, and Reuven, a progressive Zionist Jew. And it kind of personifies this tension between the different sects of the Jewish religion by expressing Danny and Reuven as outsiders towards one another. And so the film opens with this baseball game between Danny's team and Reuven's team. And the Hasidim Jews on Danny's team were characterized by Reuven and his teammates as outsiders in a, quote, strange group due to the way that they dressed and acted. Reuven's team taunted the Hasidims and told them to, quote, stick to praying.
They were a strange group. I didn't know very much about them. They would always keep to themselves.
Strike! I don't think this is their game. They should stick to praying.
Reuven initially perceived Danny as some kind of alien, and he perceived Danny as an outsider to society and referred to the Hasidim Jews as, quote, you people. Reuven questions on numerous occasions why Danny is so weird and why he dresses like he's from the last century. And so this film really emphasizes the alien nature of Danny's character in comparison to Reuven, as Danny is not Americanized and thus has not assimilated into the popular American society like Reuven has.
You are weird. I am? Yeah, you are. You look like you walked out of another century. You play baseball like Babe Ruth. You talk like you're from outer space. Thanks for the compliment. Anyway, now I can look like Errol Flynn. Who is he? Errol Flynn. Robin Hood. Captain Blood. Errol Flynn. You don't know who Errol Flynn is? The movie star?
Oh. Never been to a movie.
No, Ziggy Elman plays Benny Goodman.
Who?
Benny, you don't know who Benny Goodman is? I don't believe... You haven't been around too much, have you?
So although Danny and Reuven are both Jewish, their different backgrounds in the different Jewish sects give them completely different perceptions of the world, and thus they kind of see each other as outsiders even though they're kind of from the same community. However, I would argue that this film makes Danny out to seem like more of an outsider than Reuven. And by the end of the film, Danny eventually conforms to the overall American society, as he's kind of transformed into this clean-cut American intellectual who's going to study psychology at Columbia University.
You look great.
I came over to say goodbye. I'm moving out to an apartment near Columbia University.
How did your father react when he saw you like this?
He said he almost didn't recognize me.
Danny? I'll see you.
So the article called The Chosen by Michael Rubinoff discusses that this scene was, quote, an affirmation of Jewish freedom of choice rather than a repudiation of Judaism. And while I agree with this idea to an extent, I think there was another, more broader message being sent to the audience in this scene. Throughout the film, Danny's character is completely alienized and he stands out drastically from what American society considers to be normal. And so Danny's really made to seem like he's this like prisoner to his own life as a result of his religious background as a Hasidim Jew. And the film kind of portrays Reuven and Reuven's father as Danny's liberators, because they provide these resources and ideas for Danny to pursue his desires of studying psychology. And so I think the film coming full circle to Danny, really transforming and changing his appearance and going off to Columbia University kind of projects this assimilationist message, especially as, Reuben's reaction. He really embraces Danny and is very excited about his new kind of identity. And so I think the film really tries to make this point that being an Americanized, progressive Zionist Jew is better than being a Hasidim Jew, and being distinctly Jewish, because, these Americanized Jews are perceived to be normal by society, and they're freed from their extensive religious duties in order to live their lives in the way that they want. And so I think this film really portrays this kind of assimilationist message similar to Hollywoodism. So in contrast to Hollywoodism in The Chosen, the film Keeping the Faith promotes the idea of Jews having their own place in American society that's equal to others, and it kind of promotes a Jewish identity that celebrates Judaism and having a Jewish heritage. So in the article Keeping the Faith, Lawrence Barron argues that, quote, the film Keeping the Faith shifts away from the idea of the melting pot model of Americanization to a multicultural one that celebrates ethnic, racial, and religious pluralism. And so this film emphasizes the Jewishness of Jake and the Catholicism of Brian, and it demonstrates how these two individuals, came together to be best friends, even though they have two completely different religious backgrounds and thus distinct identities. And so Brian and Jake, while they don't really understand each other in that regard, they have respect and love for one another. And so this is important because it affirms the idea that people of different backgrounds are kind of on this equal playing field, and that each of them have a place in society wherein they are respected by others and they're not shamed by society for their differences, and that they can come together and form friendships. And so this film really emphasizes the idea that everyone's differences must be celebrated instead of condemned by society. So in the article, Lawrence Barron says that this film, quote, reverses the formulaic strategy of effacing minority differences for the sake of integration into American society and rapid upward socioeconomic mobility. Instead, Norton and the screenwriter Stuart Blumberg fashioned the movie as a plea for respecting cultural, racial, and religious diversity. And so this really goes against the traditional message of, Jews having to hide their differences in order to be accepted by society and to be able to, achieve socioeconomic status. So to illustrate this point, the author describes that in this film, quote, the privileging of spiritual fulfillment over material success and multicultural pluralism subverts the conventional narrative of Jewish assimilation and economic achievement. So there is one point in this film where some may argue that there is an assimilationist message being portrayed, and that's the scene when Anna surprises Jake with the news that she's converting to Judaism. And initially I kind of agreed with this analysis, however, I think there might be a broader point being made with this scene, and I say this because, Anna's a Gentile embracing and converting to Judaism, and, the other films promote the opposite idea where, like in Hollywoodism, the Hollywood moguls converted to Catholicism and Christianity. And so those films kind of promoted this idea of the Jew assimilating into Gentile America, whereas this film is kind of promoting the opposite idea. And so I think this film, really promotes this idea that just because, you're from one background, you're from one religion, doesn't mean you can't embrace others from, other religions and other backgrounds. And so, I think this film really promotes this idea of diversity in American society and kind of, the celebration of these differences between two people, and that, it's not strictly, whatever. And so, overall, this film really emphasizes the Jewish identity in American society, and it shows that the distinct identity of Jews is, welcome and embraced in society instead of being shunned and condemned. And, instead of Jews having to feel like they need to hide their identity and, conform to the preferences of Gentiles, Jews should instead, assume their full identity as Jews and, understand that their distinct identity belongs in American society as everyone else's does.